Okay, the podcast is about to start, so at ease. More importantly, the sponsor part of the podcast is about to start. And that sponsor? Why, it's Sparkplug Coffee. They would like you to know that they have fairly traded premium Arabica beans, which are the freshest in Canada. If you're not into the caffeinated brand, you can get all the decaf or half-calf that you want. They've got a veritable plethora of blends and roasts, and they even do a thing where they mix it up and offer a rotation of seasonal blends. If your home address is here in Canada, you'll get free shipping, and your order will arrive within 1 week. If you're American, then you don't get free shipping, but what you buy will still get there in a week or less. And if you're stuck in a prison camp during World War II, you might have to settle for what the Nazis give you because Sparkplug isn't an overseas product yet. Plus, they can't go back in time to the Second World War. There's limitations here. Now, if you do the sensible thing and sign up for a membership, you'll get perks and deals that someone who just orders once in a while won't. Members also save money on every single order. You can customize to get your beans when you need them, not just whenever it suits Sparkplug. You're in control of your own coffee drinking, Sarge. And this most definitely is not a Coffee of the Month Club. They say no to a Coffee of the Month Club. 9? Is that what it is in German? No. So toss the words sparkplug.coffee/HYES into your browser and you'll save 20% off your next order. That HYES promo code needs to go in the right box, and when it does, you will save money. Then you won't have to trade with the enemy to get some creature comforts while they hold you prisoner. All right then, it's time for Andrew Luther to kick off his theme song and get this movie review underway. Action! Have you ever seen Stalag 17? Hey there everyone, and thank you for devoting some time to the 515th edition of Have You Ever Seen? This channel goes back into the past, sometimes way back into the past, and reviews and spoils classic films. More often than not, what you get on this channel is a back and forth between a husband and a wife, but it's a Friday and the wife doesn't work Fridays. Not at this anyway. She's working her actual job right now. So I'm Ryan Ellis, barely awake and yippee-yapping at you all on my own about Billy Wilder's prisoner of war comedy. Just to set the scene, when I talk alone, I go through the plot sequentially and throw in many, many asides, and some hopefully amusing quips. I hope they're amusing. I try. I probably fail. A lot. It helps if you've seen the movie, but I will itemize every major and a lot of minor occurrences in the plot, so the uninitiated can certainly get a lot out of this too. So let's do it. Stalag 17 was released by Paramount Pictures 4 days shy of 70 years ago, on June 6th, 1953. Wikipedia says the black and white movie cleaned up at the box office that spring and summer. They've got it costing Paramount not even $2 million, but grossing about 10 million simoleons. If my math is good, and it isn't usually, that's 5 times the budget. 1, 2, 3, carry the 10 million, 2 million, yeah, 5 times. The film has been treated well by Rotten Tomatoes critics for 70 years. 91% of them like it. There are 75 reviews on the site, which feels like a lot for an old movie, and their average is 8.4 out of 10. 93% of Rotten Tomatoes audiences like it too. Stalag 17 was an Oscar winner. William Holden took home his only trophy for his performance as Sergeant J.J. Sefton, although he was nominated for Sunset Boulevard and Network 2, and was probably better in both of those, to be honest with you. I think he thinks so too. Or thought so. He's long dead. The film was nominated in 2 other major categories. Billy Wilder was up for Best Director, and Robert Strauss was a candidate for Best Supporting Actor. I should say they're the only other 2, but they're both major categories. Frank Sinatra won over Strauss and 3 other guys that year for the support he provided to Burt Lancaster and Montgomery Clift in From Here to Eternity, as did Fred Zinnemann over Wilder for directing From Here to Eternity. Not to say, of course, that Strauss and Wilder were number 2. Who knows? They probably weren't, actually, but they lost out to those guys. That was a big year for From Here to Eternity, which, of course, Bev and I covered a long time ago. Apparently, the reason Holden only said thank you a couple times when he won for Best Actor is because everyone was told that the show was running long and to keep it brief. I think, in fact, that Donald O'Connor, the host of the show, told Bill that exact thing as Holden was climbing up on stage. O'Connor shook his hand and said something to him. Maybe he said, "If you don't get off the stage right quick, I'll dance on your head." Holden wanted to give a proper speech, but, like a good soldier, took his orders. He also, according to what I read, thought this win was a make-good for not having his name called for Sunset Boulevard. That was the year Jose Ferrer won. He reportedly also thought Lancaster or Clift should have won instead of him. Clift never did win, although Lancaster did, so it would have been nice if he had taken it home that year, and he was probably worthy. And that might have meant that Holden could have gotten the "now he's old and has been a great actor forever, so he needs to win" award for Network, but he also would have been very worthy of winning for that performance beyond the old, he's old and deserves to win. Peter Finch is ferocious in that movie, But I've grown to appreciate Holden in that as much as in any of his great pictures, and more than Finch for sure in that movie, because, as Henry Fonda said, the part was pretty hysterical, because he was offered it. Not that Holden was unworthy winning for this, although the poster shot I saw on IMDb, was it IMDb? Yeah, I think so, has him smiling. Another one of those posters that's disingenuous of the character he plays. Monsters Ball, with Halle Berry, styled hair, looking like Halle Berry. That's not that character. And Daniel Day-Lewis, looking like he does when he's just being Daniel Day-Lewis in his normal life. I think styled hair also. For My Left Foot, such disingenuous posters for those movies. Same here, with this man smiling. He does once, I'm going to talk about that, but not often in this movie. Stalag 17 was nominated for many American Film Institute lists, but didn't make any of them. The top 100 laughs, the top 100 quotes. Holden was nominated as a top 50 hero on the Heroes and Villains list. Okay, and the film had a shot at making one or both of the 1998 and 2007 AFI Top 100 lists. That nominated quote, by the way, was Commandant von Scherbach, I guess, saying to the POWs, "No one has ever escaped from Stalag 17? Not alive, anyway." Wilder's movies are jammed with great lines, so I don't know why the AFI considered this at least one of the 400 greatest ever. Considering how often the script has Strauss saying, "Addies," that whole thing he does with the mailman, "Addies, addies." That quote being nominated would have made more sense, whether you like it or not, because it's at least very memorable. But Scherbach's quote, really? Okay, so let's get into it. Stalag 17 opens with the song you also hear in Dr. Strangelove and Die Hard with a Vengeance. Yep, it's in there. When Johnny comes marching home, hurrah, hurrah, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Then we get a voiceover by Gil Stratton, who plays Cookie. He's Holden's right-hand man in this movie, and we'll hear from him quite a bit throughout the story. It's funny how that thing with Robert McKee and adaptation, which I think the real guy said, I don't think that was made up for that film, the sentiment anyway. Don't you use any, I haven't sworn yet, have I? GD narration in your movie, voiceover narration that is. And yet some of the greatest movies ever, and some of the greatest screenwriters ever, have been voiceover narration guys. The Coens, Scorsese, Wilder. So what does Robert McKee know? Anyway, Cookie's complaining about how no one ever made a movie about prisoners of war. Of course, the most famous one of all was released 10 years later, and that's The Great Escape. Anyway, we learn that there are 630 American airmen in this prison camp. Cookie says they're all sergeants, but we do meet men of other ranks as the story plays out. It's certainly mostly sergeants. So I guess I'm being pedantic, as I do often. The camp, by the way, is on the Danube near the Austrian-German border, and Stalag is simply the German word for prison camp. While the story is set over there, they actually shot it at a ranch in California, and of course on sound stages. Really, most of the movie was shot in the comfort of a studio. The majority of scenes are inside Barracks 4 specifically. So Cookie tells us the year is 1944, and it's a week before Christmas. Two guys named Manfredi and Johnson are getting ready to make a nighttime escape. Everybody pitches in to prepare the escapees. Well, not Sefton, and even Cookie for that matter. They use wooden planks from the bunks to move the hot stove that covers the escape hole they've dug. We've certainly seen images like that ever since, including in The Great Escape. I thought it was pretty good writing that the man in charge of this group of guys, Sergeant Hoffman, makes Manfredi and Johnson go over the plan out loud, even though they all certainly would have discussed it many times before this moment. Yes, it's exposition for our sake, but I can see a superior officer demanding they make the plan crystal clear one last time. While this film is supposed to be a comedy, these early scenes are pretty tense. There's also the ongoing mystery that lasts close to the end of the film about just who is the turncoat who's collaborating with the Nazis. So, it wasn't nominated for the AFI's thrillers, but maybe it should have been. William Holden is, of course, Sergeant J.J. Sefton, the cynic who bets that Manfredi and Johnson won't even get out of the forest, never mind making it to safety. And Sefton quickly wins his wager because the Jerrys are waiting with a big-ass machine gun, putting giant holes in our boys before they even really get into the forest, never mind out of it. Sefton collects his winnings over the grumbles of the other guys, but it's not like JJ isn't upset that his colleagues just got mowed down. He does throw his cigar down with disgust, or not so much disgust, but I think sadness really is what Holden's playing there. Disappointment, for sure. Holden might not be hugely emotive in this movie, but you can tell he's at least a little gut-punched about what just happened there. The next morning, the jovial Nazi Sergeant Schultz, who's played by Sig Ruman, and of course is the inspiration for Colonel Klink in the Hogan Serial Show, confirms that Manfredi and Johnson bought it last night. Everyone knew that, but now they really know that. He keeps saying it's so sad that such nice young boys died the night before. He's a nice Nazi! Of course, it's reductive thinking to assume that people who spend so much time together in a situation, even like this, can't make some kind of connections, even though they are fighting on opposite sides. Of course, what he's really doing is drilling into their heads the futility of trying to escape. So don't even try it, boys. Pretty good writing on Wilder's part. I don't think I've really picked up on that till this viewing, which is probably my 5th time seeing this movie. Schultz might claim he's unhappy about the dead guys, but the Jerrys don't have a problem leaving the two bodies right in the middle of the prison camp for all to see, which is obviously the point. Look what happens when you try to escape. Your body grows cold and lays in the mud. At least their bullet-ridden bodies are covered by a blanket. For now. Commandant Oberst von Scherbach rattles off that AFI-nominated quote about no man escaping alive, then has a guy pull back the blanket so the men can unquestionably see the dead bodies. He also reveals that he knew about the tunnel that was dug under the stove in Barracks 4, the home of Sefton and our main characters. After Animal protests by throwing a rock in a puddle near the Commandant, he steps forward to take responsibility. Of course, Animal is Robert Strauss. But instead of Animal having to face the wrath of the head man, all the guys step forward to back him up. Even Sefton. It's an I'm Spartacus, I'm Spartacus, I'm Spartacus moment, although Kubrick's movie was still 7 years in the future, so this beat it to the punch. This is subtler, though, too, even though that's a very famous moment, and a great moment, I guess, in that movie. I'm not a huge fan of Spartacus, but good moment. But hey, this is a comedy, and we're reminded of that when somebody sees that there are new dames in the Russian compound. The guys act like wild men at the mere thought of even just seeing a woman. And it's been a couple years, I guess I can't really blame them. Animal can't control himself and belly flops into the mud as he tries to get just a little bit closer to the ladies, but that puts him past the "do not cross, or your body will be used for target practice" wire. Robert Strauss gets absolutely covered in mud here. He must have had to wallow in it for a while, because I doubt they got this in one take and moved on. We're also reminded for the second time that Animal is obsessed with Betty Grable, and his buddy Harry has promised to get him a date with the movie star after the war is over. Of course, Harry's played by Harvey Lembeck. Did they play them on the stage? I think they did. I think the two guys played these characters on the stage. Oh, precious, precious pipe dreams of Betty Grable and Animal. Real name is Stanislaw Kozawa. Well, real name for the character, not the guy. Since we're talking about the comedy in this movie, this is a pretty good time for the nutshell. So, Stalag 17, in a nutshell, the Holocaust, but funny! I'm reminded that Spielberg said that's one thing you could never cross as a comedy. I think it was before Life is Beautiful, which was up against his movie, Saving Private Ryan, for Best Picture and a lot of other awards in '98. I don't ever heard how he felt about Benigni making fun of the war. We didn't make fun of the war, but anyway, how he made a comedy about that. And also, of course, Hogan's Heroes. People did say that show was in bad taste. I wonder if they thought this movie was in bad taste. I guess really not, considering their critical reviews and everything at the time and since. Okay, the Nazis haven't taken the wood out of the stove in Barracks 4, as Scherbach said they would, just yet, because Sefton is able to fry an egg on it, even though the other guys opt to settle for nearly inedible potato soup for their own breakfast. Since Harry and Animal missed out on the most important potato-y meal of the day while they were out flopping around in the mud, they have serious egg envy. Comedy, I guess? Hoffman, Duke, and really nearly all the guys are pretty cheesed that Sefton trades with the enemy at all, but especially to get this egg the day after their friends had been blown away. Holden gets his first speech in the film, saying he knew they had no chance of escaping, and neither does he, so he's going to make himself comfortable in the meantime, even if it means making nice with the bad guys. It's funny, too, I've talked about Great Escape a bunch, and I will some more in this episode, but in that movie they talk about how it's their obligation to try to escape, to distract the Nazis, drive them crazy, and most importantly of all, put more men in that camp to watch them, guard them, and keep them from escaping. But that's not the way that at least Sefton feels about it at this time. Interesting take on that. Maybe Great Escape made that up. Makes sense to me, though. Duke is ready to fight Sefton over that little spiel, but hey, we're due for some laughs, and it's also time for some morning announcements. Annies! Addies. Every time the fellows make any kind of ruckus, Marco the mailman says exactly that in a weird high-pitched voice. And every time he says that, Animal follows with an addies. I guess this broke him up back in 1953, slapping knees and such. I did laugh, though, when a Nazi putz walks by the barracks and is about to discover the cable that's providing our heroes some info about the front lines, which they're hearing on a very black market radio. So as he's about to discover that, Harry distracts him with a volleyball. They've been playing volleyball because they've got this cable that looks like it's part of the net going to the side of the shack, the barracks. The villain enjoys throwing the ball, not bumping, setting, or spiking, mind you, and even hands his rifle over to Harry so he can keep living it up. That was pretty cute. Here's my gun while I play sports. And when Schultz goes into the barracks, with the radio safely stashed away now, we discover how the Nazis found out about the escape attempt last night. What happens is somebody ties a light cord in a loop and leaves a slip of paper inside of the hollow queen on the chess set that's always on that table when there's dirt to share. Cookie narrates a flashback that shows how Sefton built up such a giant cigarette stash, which is primarily what he uses to bribe the prison guards. One of his rackets is to run a quote-unquote horse race. What he does is attach numbers to mice tails and has them run a makeshift course on the floor. Animal's really mad that his rodent didn't win, but at least this provided them all with 14 seconds worth of entertainment. I didn't laugh at this, but it's a cute little scene. Cookie continues on telling his story about Sefton, describing how JJ managed to make some kind of approximation of schnapps, which he sold for a few cigs a man. And you know what? They made terrible booze in the Great Escape, too. Great Escape, Great Escape, Great Escape. Marcia. Harry and Animal nearly choke on Sefton's concoction. I don't know how potatoes and apparently string can cause so much trauma to a man's throat, but comedy. Another scam Sefton runs is to aim a telescope at, not really a scam I guess, but another thing he does is to aim a telescope at the shower shack in the Russian women's camp. The men have to pay a handful of cigarettes or half a bar of chocolate for the privilege of soaking their eyes in it for a few seconds. I know soldiers love to smoke, okay, but that seems like a lot of food to hand over when you're barely getting enough to eat. Hoard that chocolate, don't give it away for then again, it is women and you've been in a prison camp for a couple of years with just guys. Anyway, these guys don't even seem to smoke, although maybe that's because the cigar-smoking Sefton has all the butts in his footlocker. Did they smoke at all in this movie other than him smoking cigars? It's not a lot, is it? The comic relief gets to be front row center again when Harry and Animal comically make their way into the women's camp before brushing paint on a Nazi dude's face and then running away. Oh, the tomfoolery. You'd think they would be brutally beaten for all those hijinks, especially screwing with a prison guard, but I guess they got off scot-free just because they're funny, or supposed to be. Marco the Mailman is back to tell everybody to be at ease, and to hand out mail. So he's actually being a mailman this time. The other time he was more of an announcement guy. Animal's jealous that his best buddy, Shapiro, gets more mail than nearly all the other guys combined. We find out soon after that these aren't love letters, though. The man just owes payments on his car, on his Plymouth. A couple of new guys are welcomed into the barracks here. One of them is Don Taylor playing Lieutenant Dunbar. Dunbar's co-newbie is Sergeant Bagradian, who does a pretty great impression of Clark Gable after Animal asks him about his lady, Grable. This Jay Lawrence dude does a pretty awesome Jimmy Cagney, too. They should have just let this guy keep doing this for a while. He even gets Gable and Cagney's facial expressions down. And later on he also does a passable impression of Cary Grant. Keeping on the impressions kick, just to screw with Schultz, a lot of the guys put on Hitler mustaches, and Bagradian pretends to read Mein Kampf. He rattles off as many nonsensical German words as he can think of, then the fellas turn around and mock salute the inspiration for Colonel Klink with their Hitler mustaches. Although Schultz tells him an inspection is due to happen soon, what he's really there for is to discover the radio that the guys have hidden in a bucket. After the guys are forced outside, he notices that the light cord is tied again, so he trades the chess piece for one of his own. The mystery continues. Because they're mad about the radio being found, the guys have had enough of Sefton, both his hoarding, but even more importantly because they think he's the informant, and they break into his footlocker of treasures. He's not there yet at this point, though. Duke had been following Sefton around, finding out that JJ was in the women's camp. An angry barracks chief Hoffman just goes ahead and destroys Sefton's telescope. Richard Erdman, by the way, plays Hoffman. He's got a pretty big role in this, but I didn't write down his credits like I should have. The Crud, as Neville Brand often calls Sefton, returns and they stare bullets into him. But any real conflict is postponed once the Commandant drops in. This is not common, I don't think, in this camp, that he comes in there. I like how his underlings always have to lay planks in the mud, just so he won't get his boots wet and muddy. There are a few entries on the IMDb that Billy Wilder did the opposite of this early in shooting. He waded around in the mud in his good shoes to show the actors that he wasn't going to ask them to get filthy if he wasn't willing to do the same. And of course, the Commandant is played by another director, Otto Preminger, who didn't act a ton, but here he's acting for Wilder. Anyway, the Commandant has come by for Dunbar, first apologizing, or at least pretending to be sorry, for putting this officer in with enlisted men. Dunbar talks back and won't go with the Nazis until they force him to, which they do. But then it's back to the business at hand, so everyone turns and stares down Sefton, who's not sassing his way to this one. They pin him down in his bunk and beat the crap out of him, although Wilder quickly cuts the scene so it doesn't get too graphic. The next day, Red Cross trucks arrive with supplies, including ping-pong balls, which Cookie tells us in voiceover will eventually come in handy. Sefton malingers in his bunk and tries to trade whatever he has to get Schultz to tell him who the actual stool pigeon is. His only mission now is to find out who's selling the guys out, because it's not him. Although I suppose at this point you could argue that we didn't, well, the first time you see the movie, you don't know if it really is him still, but he's just lying to everybody, covering his ass. The Geneva Conventions inspect these prison camps back in this time frame, so the Geneva man comes in and looks around, but the Nazis pretend all is well. He prompts them to speak up and admit if things are bad, because that's what the Geneva Conventions are for, but loose lips sink a whole fleet of ships. Even Sefton won't talk about who beat him up or why. It's like the mob here. I didn't see nothing. I didn't hear nothing. I ain't saying nothing. Even though arrogant jerk-off Donald Rumsfeld would not agree because he bragged about how he stood up at his desk all day when he was the Secretary of Defense. Your choice, guy. We see that Dunbar is being tortured for information about the German train job that Dunbar and Bagradian pulled. And the torture is simple. Dunbar has to stand there and keep answering questions. He clearly hasn't slept in a while. He says it's been 3 days, but wait, didn't he get taken into the Commandant's office the day before? Okay, well, it's been a while he's been staying there in any case. Maybe he doesn't know how long it's been. There you go. Actually, that's pretty good. I just thought that's pretty good. Maybe Wilder's whole point is, no, it's been about a day, but this guy thinks it's been a lot longer. Anyway, Commandant Scherbach whines about how Berlin has forgotten him out there in the middle of nowhere. But I remember him once he gets Dunbar to talk in his sleep. That's pretty much what this has become now. The guy's awake, but is he? And it's ironic that the Geneva guy is in the camp right as all this is happening. And when he comes in the room here, Sherbach claims this procedure isn't torture because Dunbar is no longer considered a POW. He's a saboteur. At least the lieutenant manages to sneak in a few minutes of shut-eye on the couch while Mr. Geneva is talking to Sherbach. He'd been begging for sleep on that couch, even just 5 minutes, man. Back in the barracks, now we find out who the informant is. It's the Peter Graves character, head of security, Sergeant Price. When Johnny Comes Marching Home Again, hurrah, hurrah, played during the opening credits, and now the guys sing it as a Christmas carol. Seeing Price switch to the chess piece he finds under his bunk while no one is looking made me wonder a few things about Wilder's execution of this plot point. How did no one ever notice him swapping queens? Because he's doing this a lot. And no one ever wondered why a light cord, which is in the middle of the room, hanging over their table, is sometimes half-tied and sometimes not. Well, in any case, Sefton is the one who figures it out after he catches a reflection of the swinging bulb, which has no reason to swing unless someone just messed with it, and tied it up. And he knows that Price had been right there behind him. While playing horseshoes with the fellas, Price pretends to just be innocently curious about how Dunbar pulled off the train job. I just want to know, how'd he do it? And Begradian, the impression guy, tells him how. You just light a cigarette, stick it in a book of matches, and let it burn down. It becomes a time bomb. And now Price has more info to trade to his fellow Germans. The Germans, Smithers, the Germans. The Christmas festivities are interrupted that night by a fake air raid, so that Schultz can get them all out of the barracks and find out what Price has put in the chess piece. This time, though, Price just stays behind and flat out tells Schultz what he's learned. Somehow neither of them notice that Sefton stayed behind too and hid in the shadows. He hears everything. I actually watched Peter Graves pretty closely this entire movie, because I've seen it many times, so I knew what was going to happen. He never gives away that it was him the whole time. He also doesn't lay it on too thick by saying to the others that, yeah, you can't trust that Sefton guy, no way. Or, we gotta find the rat stuff, over and over. I wouldn't say he tips his hand. Wilder does a good job of directing him, and Graves is pretty solid playing the character. So now it's Christmas Day. I guess all that stuff was Christmas Eve. And to celebrate, some guys are playing makeshift musical instruments, while the other guys are dancing with each other. So romantic. Sefton just continues to brood quietly in his bunk. I thought it was effective that not only did Holden keep to himself after they beat on him, but he did even before that. It must have been tough to work with a funny director like Billy Wilder, and to be making a comedy with him. Yeah, you don't have that many lines, and you certainly don't get to have fun like Harvey Lembeck and Robert Strauss do. Even Cookie is mad at Sefton now, but JJ speculates to his lackey that somebody in their barracks is a plant, someone who isn't even an American at all. He also reasons out the best way to use this information, so the real rat will pay for it and won't be able to rat anymore, but the important factor is that the Germans can't know that the Americans know. It's also ironic that Price is always being called security. That is his job, sure, but we know that he's the least secure guy they've got. I figure things out sometimes. Themes and stuff. Cross-cut with this important plot information is Harry goofily dressing up like Betty Grable and convincing a drunk Animal that he really is the actress. And all this while Animal is drunk on legit alcohol. It's the good stuff that Sefton had stashed before the guys raided it. This is maybe the best example of how these Lembeck-Strauss scenes are moderately charming, and they're obviously supposed to bust some guts, but I don't remember laughing at any of these antics when I first saw this even 25 years ago, never mind seeing it a couple of days ago. So the guys find out that Dunbar is going to be transferred out of the camp, but they intend to create a distraction and spring him loose. Sefton smartly pipes up that the stoolie shouldn't be let loose outside to mill around with everyone else, because he'd flap his gums about the plan to the Nazis. Nazis, Nazis, Nazis. Sefton says he knows he has to stay in the barracks, okay, fine, but they also need someone to watch him. And logically, he says it should be security. Through all this, Sefton is pulling a Hercule Poirot act on Price, or maybe it's Columbo? One more thing. And pretends like he's trying to figure out something that he, of course, already knows. So here's the ping pong ball payoff. The guys have built a smoke bomb with bits from them, which creates a huge distraction. They get the lieutenant away from the Jerrys, and no one can find him hiding in the water tank because Hoffy is the only one who knows that's where he is, which is what Hoffy says, but it's interesting to think, is he the one that put him in there and no one saw him do it? You would think that he had to have help to do that. Okay. I guess you can argue that no one in the lookout towers can spot the guy crouching on the ladder inside that water tank. But can't they? Isn't that part of the point of those lookouts, to see everything in the camp? Anyway, this proves just how tough Dunbar is, to crouch against a cold piece of tin at Christmas time in Germany and hold on to that metal ladder. Germany, Austria, okay, yes. It's Austria, Arnold's home, silly. Price is the one who volunteers to be the one to get Dunbar out of the camp and as far from there as possible. But we know how that would actually go. Sefton finally speaks up and plays his trump card. He accuses Price of being a big old rat. As guys did back then, Sefton slaps Price in the face a few times when the Nazi mole beaks off about these accusations. Didn't I see that also when I covered Key Largo? Slap, slap! Sefton shows all the guys the hollow queens that were used to exchange notes, so Price tries to make a break for it, but now he's the target, not Sergeant Sefton. JJ volunteers to be the one to get Dunbar out, partly because he thinks there would be a big reward from the rich man's family back home. That was established earlier, by the way, that Dunbar is quite well off, and Sefton knew him somehow back in Ohio, I think it was. Sefton knows they'll need a great distraction so they can get out. He also wants to kill two birds with one stone by getting Price killed in the process. The other guys will push Price out the door at the right time because, as we heard the Commandant say earlier, any man spotted on the compound after dark will be shot on sight. But one of the touches from this movie I always remembered is that Sefton's last words to the other sergeants is, "If I ever run into any of you in a street corner, let's pretend we never met before." And that's a pretty good parting shot, but then he pops back out of the escape hatch, smiles, and salutes. There's the one smile he gets in the whole film. Holden deserved a close-up in that moment, I thought, but it was still a pretty cool, "see ya, morons." After all, no matter how much they battled all throughout this film, they are all in this war effort together, and I think that's what that's supposed to mean, is that he may not like them, they don't like him. Duke came around, especially when Sefton lit a match on the back of his neck. He actually smiled at that. Okay, anyway. Well, on top of having to cling to a cold ladder all this time, for at least a day, I guess, through a big part of that day, Dunbar is also up to his waist in the water. And I remind you, this is Germany in late December. Triple yikes. At the right time, the boys shove Price out the door with a bunch of clattery pots tied to his foot so he can't not be noticed with all the sound. That allows Sefton and a frozen-leg Dunbar to go the other way and wire cut their way out of that hellhole. Don't let me die in this hellhole. They make it without being spotted, just as Schultz, the Commandant, and their Nazi chums see that the man they blew away was actually their mole. And because of that, I do worry for the rest of the Americans in the camp. Just how bad a price are they going to pay for the German rat being killed and for two guys escaping, including the Commandant's prized possession, Dunbar? Anyway, when Johnny Comes Marching Home Again, hurrah, hurrah, plays one last time, or is whistled by Cookie at least, and we're out. Merry Christmas, everyone! I'm going to save this as a solo show I could do at Christmas if I'd realized this had a Christmas scene at the end, and quite a long sequence, really. So the cast. William Holden was in 4 AFI movies, and they're all great. Sunset Boulevard, The Bridge in the River Kwai, The Wild Bunch, and Network. Some of my very favorites in there, especially Sunset, Bridge, and Network. Just like we hadn't covered a Humphrey Bogart movie in a very long time before I reviewed Key Largo on May 19th, we also hadn't covered Holden since those AFI movies. Both cases, I was surprised to see that, but we must have done something, but I don't think so. Holden, like his Sabrina co-star Bogart, which Wilder directed the year after this, was on the AFI's top 25 male stars list. Bogey was number 1 and Holden was number 25. And to be honest with you, I might reverse those, or at least put Bogey a lot lower and Holden higher. Holden wasn't the first choice for this role. Kirk Douglas and Charlton Heston could have had it. Heston was out once they made Sefton so unlikable. Douglas, though, later said he made a mistake and should have worked with Wilder again after starring for him in Billy's previous project, an epic bomb, Ace in the Hole. Of course, if there was any justice, Ace in the Hole would have been a roaring success and not taken decades to get even a lick of respect. That was between Sunset Boulevard and this. And if you've never seen or even heard of Ace in the Hole, look for it if you like classic movies, very cynical movies as well, and pretty timely, especially when it comes to the media. The media. Well, don't, because they're the problem there. Don Taylor, so he's Dunbar. He directed more than he acted. He was at the helm of the Omen sequel, Damien 2, which starred William Holden, a Planet of the Apes sequel, Escape from the Planet of the Apes, and did a stupendous amount of TV. As far as acting, he had been in the original Father of the Bride a few years before this, and its sequel, too. Robert Strauss worked with Wilder again on the 7-Year Itch, which was, I think, Wilder's next. No, it was 2 projects later, because it was Sabrina and then 7-Year Itch. The 50s were incredible for Billy Wilder, and was also in another Holden flick set during a war, The Bridges at Toko-Ri. He was never nominated for another Oscar, and I'd say the selection was awfully dubious in the first place. At ease, Alice. Sorry, Animal, I'm sorry. Harvey Lembeck was in some Frankie and Annette beach movies in the 60s, but what you mostly find in his IMDb projects list is a slew of performances on television. And maybe he was a Broadway guy, too, if he did this as a performance on the stage. Peter Graves was in The Night of the Hunter a few years later. He also played Jim Phelps, the main character on the Mission Impossible TV series, so that wasn't Ethan Hunt, no Cruise character back then. It was Jim Phelps, the one that Voight played in the first Mission Impossible in '96. So that series was back in the 60s and 70s. And he went on to have some fun playing against his own serious image in Airplane, and then its sequel. That's one of the best things about the Airplane movies, is that they cast people like Shatner and Graves and, of course, Leslie Nielsen, but then somebody else in the booth, the air traffic control. What's his name again? Oh, I forget his name. Anyway, all of them cast against type, playing it seriously. Of course, that's why it's so funny. Explaining comedy here. Neville Brand, so he's Duke, worked for over 35 years and did an epic amount of acting on television. He was also in some classic noir films like Kansas City Confidential and the original DOA. Sig Ruman was in all sorts of comedies, but he also had roles in All Quiet on the Western Front, A Night at the Opera, and White Christmas. All of those films have been covered by this podcast. Ruman also worked with Wilder again later on down the road, I think a few times. One of those was The Fortune Cookie. Otto Preminger, who plays the Commandant, was of course far better known as a director than as an actor. We covered the noir classic that he directed, Laura, several years ago. He was also at the helm of the only AFI nominee for either the 1998 or 2007 Top 100 lists that I have never been able to track down, Porgy and Bess. If it's available somewhere, I'd love to hear where. Please tell me. Stalag 17 was not only directed by Billy Wilder, but he also produced it. And he wrote it with Edwin Blum, or Bloom, B-L-U-M. They based it on the 1951 play by Donald Bevan and Edmund Czersinski, T-R-Z-C-I-N, Ski. Czersinski? Probably Czersinski, both of whom were actual POWs. Wilder made the brilliant Double Indemnity and Sunset Boulevard, but also classic laugh fests like Some Like It Hot and The Apartment. We reviewed all those because all were AFI movies, and all should have been. Bev and I talked about Billy's The Lost Weekend during Oscar month last year. The man won 2 Oscars for that film, and 4 others, 3 for The Apartment, and also for writing Sunset Boulevard. Sunset Boulevard. He also won the Irving G. Thalberg Award in 1988. This was such a productive time for both Wilder and Holden. They seemed to go from success to success in the 50s. Okay, Ace in the Hole didn't do well for Billy a few years before this, but now it's regarded as a classic. Plus he had done Sunset Boulevard the year before that, then Sabrina, The 7-Year Itch, Some Like It Hot, and The Apartment all came out in the next 7 years after this. What a run. Meanwhile, Holden was making big movies like Picnic, Love is a Many Splendid Thing, and The Bridge on the River Kwai without Wilder in that decade as well, and had become a giant star. I think I read somewhere he was the biggest star of the 50s, box office-wise. Billy liked actors to read what he and his co-writers jotted down and not go off script, but Holden wanted to change their take on Sefton by softening him, just like Heston did. Chuck was able to bail when that didn't happen, and I don't know how Holden felt about it in the end, that he was, I think, probably in his eyes, tamped down, or not so much tamped down, but made to be a cynic the whole way through until maybe the very end, I guess. But he did win the trophy, and the movie was very successful, so you'd think he was proud of it. Wilder lost his parents during the Holocaust, so it's a little surprising he would do a comedy about the war. Of course, this man did have a smile, though your heart is breaking quality about him. As angry as I'm sure he always was that he lost his family to pricks like Sherbach and Schultz, he had to have been pretty close to as furious at Paramount as he was at them, because Paramount screwed with his money. That's because, as I've said, Ace in the Hole was a dud, so they didn't give him a cut of the profits for this that he expected, since they felt like he didn't deliver with his previous picture. Some other tech people to talk about here. George Tomasini was the editor, and that's interesting because he became Hitchcock's guy. I'm sure Tomasini worked with other directors, but it became a Hitchcock collaboration for, I think, the rest of his career whenever they did start working together. And I just always associate those two guys together, the way you do Spielberg and Michael Kahn and Scorsese and Thomas Schoonmaker. If they work with anybody else, it's very rarely. A few other projects, but not a ton more. Franz maybe? Waxman was the music composer. He won back-to-back Oscars for Sunset Boulevard and A Place in the Sun earlier in the 50s, in fact, just a few years before this. He wrote music for other Wilder Flicker shows, but was working a lot with Hitchcock during this time frame, including on Rear Window, probably my favorite Hitchcock film, before Alfred's regular composer became Bernard Herrmann. Now, about the connection to Hogan's Heroes. Reportedly, these guys sued the makers of that show for stealing their stuff. The case was settled out of court, though. I never saw that goofy program, but I heard it was corny and even just flat-out stupid. Still, which product is better known these days? It's probably Hogan's Heroes. And that's my biggest problem with what is a good dramedy. I wouldn't call this really a comedy, it's a dramedy. Well, the biggest problem with Stalag 17 is that I didn't laugh at almost anything in this comedy, but it's just hard to say that this film has remained relevant 70 years later. I've seen it a number of times and I own the DVD, so I'm clearly some kind of fan, but it just doesn't ring as true as so many other Wilder flicks do, and some of them to me got better. Some Like It Hot, for example. I like it a lot more now than I did, say, 20 years ago. And The Apartment also. Yes, there's that great consistency that Holden is never really part of the group, even before they beat on him, which some movies would have thrown out the window just to let him cut loose and be funny for even one scene. It's not like Steve McQueen is like Sefton is in The Great Escape with the other POWs, but he's never truly part of the team most of the time, so when he is partying with them in the 4th of July scene, it does feel a little disingenuous. And since Sefton has been hoarding goods and not sharing with others, which the rest of the guys have a right to be mad about, it would be a lie if he were to connect with them pretty much ever. I guess you could argue he does at the end, at the very end, although it doesn't do much good as a bonding exercise when he's leaving anyway. He's a cynic and a jerk, although I do think that salute and smile was the last thing he ever does in the barracks goes a lot further than "I always loved you guys" speech would have. But at least the movie was original in its day, even if it isn't anymore. If Cookie's voiceover is correct, there never had been a movie about prisoners of war. Wait a minute, prisoners of war movie? What about Grand Illusion? That co-starred Erich von Stroheim, who Wilder worked with only 3 years earlier in Sunset Boulevard. It was a French film that not many people in America probably saw until years after even this, and it had been over 10 years as it was. Anyway, there have been so many POW movies made since the Stalag 17 has gotten lost in the morass. Then again, the AFI nominated it for all kinds of lists, which was many decades after the film came out, and many decades after other POW pictures had also come out. So it did remain relevant with the AFI people anyway. I enjoyed seeing it, but it does feel a little slow. The runtime is 2 hours, and it feels like at least that long. With all those scenes in the barracks, it's very stage-bound, although it's based on a play, so I suppose that's to be expected. I'd recommend this film, but Bev may have made the right choice in skipping it when I gave her the choice to see this or Serpico. She might have rolled her eyes hard enough at the hairy and animal antics to permanently injure them. Plus, there's just as much of a "you're making fun of a Nazi prison camp" problem as there was in Hogan's Heroes. She's more sensitive to that sort of stuff than I am. But yes, this was and is a solid movie made by extremely talented people. It just got one-upped big time a decade later by the underrated John Sturges when he cast a bunch of stars in The Great Escape. And for that matter, there was the even better Prisoner of Requie just 4 years after Stalag 17, which remains one of the greatest epics of all time, and it does star William Holden. And if you include Uncommon Valor on the list of PW flicks, and I would, well, I've always had a soft spot in my heart for that one. All right, that does it for Stalag 17. Recommended, but not strongly. I wish I could rave, but I'm certainly saying that it wouldn't be a waste of your time to watch it. The next film I'm planning to cover on my own is the original Scarface, the Paul Muni one from the 30s. I thought about loading up the Al Pacino one, but that Little Fran has already been reviewed to death. I'm more curious to see what Howard Hughes and Howard Hawks did with their concoction. I've seen it before, but it's been a few decades, so it's going to feel pretty new to moi. That'll come out on Friday, June 16th. Another reason to steer clear of the 1983 version of Scarface is because we've got other plans for Ali P. No one's ever called him Ali P before, and I'm not going to do it again. On Monday, Bev and I will be in fact talking about a great director who was in the middle of an incredible run of films, as was Wilder here. It's Sidney Lumet at the helm of one of Pacino's most authentic performances, Serpico. If you want to contact me or Bev, you can tweet. I'm at MovieFiend51, and Bev is at BevEllis. If you're an emailer, our address is haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com. Good old Gmail. Since the beginning of this year, we've been posting our episodes in full on YouTube. Now, if you've come this far with this one, you probably don't need to check it out there. But maybe you'd rather hear Have You Ever Seen That Way in the future. So now you know. Be a subscriber. You'll even get to look at our groovy gray graphic. The destination in your browser is at HYESEllis. So that's basically just a website in a way. At HYESELLIS. We haven't done it in quite a while, but Bev and I have appeared on camera sometimes this year. We hope to get back to that in the summer when I have more time after I scale back to just one podcast. That other podcast, Scoring at the Movies, only has 5 days left to live. We're wrapping it up on June 7th with a chat about Rocky Balboa. You ended the podcast? You talked about Rocky a lot. Why don't you do some more? Why are you quitting? Because I want to be out in the sun this summer, Rock. Ryan's been in this room too long, too often, too much, too frequently. Speaking of frequent, don't forget to frequent our sponsor, Spark Plug Coffee. They've got the awesomest Arabica beans in this country, and they'll give you a one-time 20% discount if you just use our HYES promo code, and appropriate to this movie about people that are probably starving. They don't really look or act like they are, but they probably are. My stomach is making noise. And I just had lunch. Okay, enough of my personal problems. Thanks a lot for listening to this rant today. Happy weekend. See you on Monday with Serpico. But as for now, at ease. At ease. I just don't get why that's funny. And